Hey everybody, I want to talk about anger issues, anger management, that type of thing. It's something that I've talked about in the past, so this is kind of sort of a repeat, but I think it's also been significantly long enough in the past where I can do this. Anger in itself, it's important that we understand what anger is, what causes it, and what to do about it. Because in the English language, the English itself is more conducive to causing anger than other languages, I think. I think because I really don't speak any other languages except English. I do speak some Spanish. My wife is from Mexico, and I learned Spanish as a kid growing up. But in general, there's some very common expressions in English, particularly in America at least, that I think cause an exacerbation of anger, and I'm going to get into that. So let's start out first with what anger is. Okay, when you get angry, it's usually because first of all, it's a reaction, okay? And it's important that you understand that your reactions originate from you. And it is something that you create, you express, and you broadcast. So anger comes from inside you, and then it gets broadcast either just within yourself, like if you internalize it, for example, and you don't say anything, then what that means is that you create this barrier and your need to express yourself gets muted and it gets contained and it stays inside. Or if, like what Ron White says, you have the right to remain silent, but you don't always have the ability. So you get angry and then you express it externally to somebody, and it has many different forms of expression. You can be angry but be nice and polite about it and be semi-considerate, so it makes you mad, but you conduct yourself in a manner where it doesn't cause a chain reaction. Or you can lose your shit and go off and have a disproportionate reaction and respond far too with way too much intensity and cause a bit of a cycle going. That's kind of sort of what dysfunctional relationships are. Your expression of anger in turn causes another expression of anger, and it just goes back and forth, right? Now, where the English language fails at resolving anger, the English language serves to reinforce the anger cycle. Because it's a common expression. We say this all too often, where we say, you are making me mad. You're making me mad, or this makes, you made me mad. Sorry I lost my temper, but you made me mad. The English language is far more destructive than constructive. Because what that does, that externalizes the source of anger, and that's not the nature of anger. Anger is a reaction. It is a response, and that comes from within you. But you say you made me angry, or you are making me angry because you're responding to what somebody else does. Now, that may very well be the case, but you are responding to somebody. They are not making you angry. You are responding with anger. And it's very important to understand that, because when you just say you're making me mad, that just it's a common expression, but the words that we use sort of absolve you from any sort of responsibility for your own anger, and that's not healthy. It's more appropriate to say I'm getting mad at you. You say, hey, I'm becoming angry with you. Or you just say, I'm getting angry now. You don't say something like, you are making me angry. They both express the same thing. They both get to the same thing. One of them places blame on where it does not belong. Okay? Because nobody has that kind of superpower over you. Nobody has the power to come and make you mad. As a matter of fact, when people try to overtly and purposefully make you mad, more times than not, the result is actually you don't get mad because you know that that's what they want. Or it's just so overtly obvious that you have a different reaction to it. Like, that's sad that you would say that, right? You know, so like when you have a longtime friend who does something on purpose just to get back at you, just to try and make you mad, it's more hurtful. You get more hurt than you do angry, right? You're like, I'm not mad. I'm actually just kind of hurt that you would do that. So understand, people just don't have that kind of power over you, and you should not view it that way either, because when you say you're making me mad, not only does that misplace the responsibility for it, but that's also putting you into a submissive position. It means that your feelings and your well-being are under the control of somebody else, and if it's under somebody else's control, then therefore you must be submissive to them, and they must be dominant, and they must have that, you know, they must have some sort of superpower over you. You see where that goes? And you may not be, you certainly are not actively thinking that when you say it, but there's still there's still a changing effect over time. It still has an effect on you, and it's one of these minute effects that you do it once, say it once, it doesn't really cause any kind of change, but when it becomes a repetitive theme and a reoccurring over and over and over, it does kind of sort of change your perception of things a little bit, and not towards what's truthful or correct, right? You say, I'm getting mad, I am getting angry, I am becoming angry, right? You know, I'm not feeling too good about this right now. I'm not feeling very happy about this. I'm actually feeling pretty angry. You see that? That's you claiming more responsibility over your reactions. And that's sort of the better way of doing it. Because what's going to happen otherwise, when you say, you're making me mad, somebody else is going to say, well, that's not my fault, you're mad. That's a pretty popular response by narcissists. If you're mad, that's not my fault. And it's one of those things that they're actually kind of right about. Now, they're doing it because they know that you will have that reaction, and they can sort of predict it. But here's the funny thing about it. They can only have influence. So they cannot make you mad. They cannot control your emotions. They can only have influence. And that's the evidence for that is the fact that we say that it's manipulation. And in order to be manipulated, you have to be a willing participant in the manipulation. You know, it's hard to see it that way, especially whenever you're in it, because you say, well, I'm not all that willing. Trust me, believe me. It's not like I want to be in this situation, but by willing, I mean you respond to it, you communicate back. You're still participating in the back and forth. One of the biggest illusions is the fact that you always have the right to remain silent. You just don't have the ability. And it's important to recognize that. You have the right to remain silent. Like, even with co-parenting and when kids are involved, you don't have to say shit, especially if you have a visitation agreement in place. You just go to where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and if he or she isn't there, then they're the ones in contempt. You're not the one in contempt if you show up and they don't, and they say, well, I tried communicating and I didn't hear anything. Well, you're still supposed to be at a specific place at a specific time, and the court order is very unambiguous about that. So it's still your responsibility to be there at the certain time, whether you hear from somebody or not. I mean, the court's probably not gonna throw them in with any kind of punishment, but the courts are gonna say, well, you know, that's how it's written, so you need to still do that, right? Even if you don't hear from them, be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Don't use it as an out to not follow through with what you're supposed to do, right? Just because somebody else is wrong doesn't mean that you should purposefully be wrong too, right? It's not an excuse for bad behavior. So yeah, you know, you have to recognize that when you get angry, what anger ultimately comes down to is that it means that you haven't found the constructive response that leads to a acceptable conclusion. So I'll say that again. Anger results whenever somebody does something or says something and you don't have a predetermined way to react or respond to it. You don't know how to react or respond such that things get resolved peacefully and results in you being content with the conclusion. You don't have that yet. So in order to avoid anger, you've got to think about it and define it and then adhere to it. So when somebody triggers you, for example, you have to say, okay, this is what needs to happen. So they throw you under the bus, they do a smear campaign, they demonize you to the children. You have to find a way to be okay with this. And one of the most helpful things that I found is that if somebody else wants to behave badly, let them do it. They want to be terrible? Be terrible. Go ahead and be terrible. You're not the one being terrible, and it's not your job or responsibility to prevent them from being terrible. If they want to be an asshole, let them be an asshole. Document it. You know what? They're an asshole. I don't need to participate in that, because once you become an asshole, then you look just as bad. Believe it or not, when somebody's being an asshole, even when you're trying to diffuse the situation, it's really easy for you to look like a willing participant, right? So this is what you do. You always respond. You should always respond with, if that's what you feel is best, you need to do what you feel is best. If that's what you feel is best, then that's what you need to do, right? Because they're going to always try and say something like, if you don't do blank, well, then I will be forced to do blah, blah, blah. If that's what you feel is best, that's what you need to do. I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you how to feel. I don't control how you feel, right? You have to recuse yourself from the interaction. Look, I don't control how you feel. I can't tell you what to do. I can't control you. Do what you feel is best. You need to do what you feel is best. They don't really know how to respond to that, right? If they want to be terrible, let them be terrible. Why not? Because that's the thing. They hold this power over you. Ultimately, they don't want to be terrible because they know they will look bad. They don't want to look bad. And they know they'll look bad, especially if you don't do anything that looks like you're precipitating it. So if you don't give them anything to respond to, right? Like if the second that they have to go do something and be terrible, they want it to be in response to something you said or did, right? Because if they're going to go be terrible, then they're going to say, well, of course I had to do that. I had to do blank because they made me do it, right? So you want to recuse them from that. Say, look, that's what you need to do. What you feel is best. Do what you feel is best. Because then they can't go be terrible and say, well, of course I had to go be terrible because they told me to do what I feel is best. People are going to look at them like a psycho. It takes the bullet out of the gun, right? You don't sit there and throw bullets at somebody that has a gun, because all they're going to do is take the bullets you're tossing to them, load them up in the gun, and use it. Make sense? So, that's what you need to do. In order to avoid being angry, you need to recognize that they don't have that kind of control over you. Anger comes from you. If you're getting angry, then you don't have control over you, and you need to. Okay? Because you don't want them to be wielding that kind of power over you, and you've become programmed to believe that. They do not have the power to make you angry. You have the lack of control that results in anger, and that's something that you need to work on. And whenever they try to make you angry, then you just have to respond. Either just don't respond and ignore it, because if you don't give them anything to use, they can't go be terrible. And even if even if you have to respond, you just say, I don't control how you feel, and I can't tell you what to do. You do what you feel is best. And usually they just won't. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Please like, comment, or share, and I'll see you on the next video.